So now we will move on to our next segment. The India Stack has been the focus of all discussions here at the Indian Pavilion. A unified software platform to usher the entire country's population into the digital age, the India Stack is a set of APIs that allows governments, businesses, startups, and developers to utilize a unique digital infrastructure to solve India's hard problems towards a presence-less, paperless, and cashless service delivery. Building on this main theme, we now move on to a very important session on the topic Technology, a Soft Power. For this, we have Mr. Ambassador Javed Ashraf, the Ambassador of India to France, Mr. Paul Hermelin, Chairman of the tech giant Capgemini, Mr. Henry Verdier, Ambassador of Digital Affairs, French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs, and the session will be moderated by Mr. Sharat Sharma, co-founder of iSpirit. Okay. The session will be moderated by Mr. Javed.
Is this working? Yes, it is. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Actually, she was right. It was Mr. Sharat Sharma who was to moderate. But the task has been passed on to me exactly at 2:48. But I'm happy to do that. It's a great privilege to have three very eminent leaders of the technology world. Also, three great architects of India-France partnership in the digital space. We have, of course, Mr. Paul Hermelin, who is the chairman of Capgemini, but also literally President Macron's special envoy representative for trade relations with India. So he has a very broad remit. But what's perhaps more important to point out, that more than half of his rather large team of work people at Capgemini are in India. So sometimes it's hard for him to decide if Capgemini is an Indian firm or a French firm. But that's a good thing because that just shows the nature of the relationship. We have Ambassador Henri Verdier, a very, very able and diplomat, entrepreneur, writer, thought leader on information technology and the digital world, and doing an extraordinary job for France in terms of digital diplomacy, but also as an ardent advocate of India-France partnership. So glad to have him here. Sharat Sharma, many ways my teacher, guru, advisor on a lot of things. Every day I speak to him, I learn a lot about all the wonderful things that are happening in India and that could happen between India and France. So he's a very important driver of this relationship. Now, when we speak of technology as soft power, now it immediately takes us into the world of geopolitics and the intersection of geopolitics and technology, which, by the way, will be the key determinant of leadership, competitiveness, power, and even sovereignty in the 21st century. So that immediately leads us to ask this question, is it really hard power or is it soft power? I think it is a combination of both. From my perspective, I'd say, as I said, that the digital technology now permeates every aspect of national life and therefore also, as I said, of national security, of defense, of economic power, of international relations, of geopolitical strength. But the way a country is perceived today, it depends on its values and what it is using digital technology for. And I cannot think of anything today that affects the lives of people and therefore can affect perception of a country and of a relationship more than digital technology, broadly speaking. And I'll give you two examples. One, of course, is that in India, the startup ecosystem and the way we are using digital technology to transform lives of the people, especially those at the end of the queue, those who are in the remotest villages and are the most challenged in terms of opportunities, is changing the perception of how India is seen, both in terms of hard power and soft power, its position in the world. Similarly, I'd say France the way President Macron has defined the vision of France in digital technology is doing the same thing for French leadership in the world, and you can see this in Viva Tech. And going forward, both President Macron and Prime Minister Modi have made digital technology and technology more broadly a central pillar of their strategic partnership in the 21st century. And we both believe that our success as countries, our success as democracies, our success as inclusive societies, and countries that believe in rules-based international order will depend a large part on our success in digital technology sphere and in the way we craft in our international partnerships, and as my friend Henri Verdier likes to say, how we lead this, and as Sharad has also been saying, in terms of setting global standards, the way we try to set standards in political terms or human values terms. So with these opening remarks on this really interesting topic, I'd like to first ask Mr. Paul Amelin, who knows India as well as he knows France, and is really, in some sense, leading a company that is global and is at the heart of digital transformation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, dear ambassador and friend. The first point, you say we should not ignore that technology is the battlefield where superpower are fighting to get supremacy over the world. And of course, we speak a lot about the big tech, mostly US, but there are some Chinese too, that dominate the information age. You name them, Google, Meta, they are all around us, by the way. So the question is this really a soft power, or is it so soft? When you see their market capitalization, the hundreds of billions of dollars that they represent, is it such a soft war, soft power, or is it hard power? And the way I'd like to take it, and that might be welcome both for French, European, and India, is technology is synonymous to innovation. And innovation is delivered by the youth of the world, young people. You just roam in the alleys of Viva Tech, it's full of young people. I'm a dinosaur here in front of many, many young people. And by the way, sitting on this stage, we miss a few young energy. And I think the countries that will have the most vibrant, well-educated youth will resist the soft war of technology. And from that standpoint, I would like to say that India might be better positioned than Europe and France, because your efforts in education lead to a massive young population keen to embrace new technology-based habits. Look at your payment system. You are now one of the most advanced in open payments. I guess Mr. Sharan will speak about it. But I would say, for me, the key of the soft war, and we have in Ukraine a hard war, and there is a soft war. The key of the soft war is not to own billions of dollars, is to be able to sit on a population that is open and that will contribute to technology. So Indian population have creepingly occupied most of the big tech headquarters. We now see the CEO of Microsoft, the CEO of IBM, the CEO of Google. So there's been a nice invasion by Indian talent. But I would just say, whatever they're important, I really believe it's the young people that hold the key of that technology competition, an educated youth, and from that standpoint, today I would bet on India.
Thank you, Mr. Paul Halban. I think you speak about your age. I think you have a very young, curious mind. I know you're so fond of innovation and new ideas and things. I think you mentioned a very important point about the geopolitical competition, especially between two emerging superpowers, one emerging and one existing, and how it is affecting the world of technology, trade, and investment. I wanted to then segue to Henri before I come to Shad, because there's something very important I wanted to speak to you about. But you know, one of the things that you have been talking about and what brings convergence between India and France is this common philosophical vision of creating a digital domain, internet, if you call it, or digital infrastructure that is open and inclusive, democratic, not dominated by a few or controlled by the state, and which fosters an open market for innovation. How do you see India, France, and Europe positioning itself between these two paradigms of this technology domain owned by a few, controlled by a few, and of the state control? And how do you think that could shape the future of the digital domain as well as of the world?
Thank you, Jawed. To answer to your question, I think that together, India and Europe, we can change the story. And we can change the story in a non-hegemonic approach, with an open and free and respecting digital common approach. But if I come back to the topic of this session, is there a soft power? First, I want to agree with Paul Hermelin that there is not just a soft power, that's pure power, hard power, soft power, geopolitical confrontation. But if we come back, if we have a look on the very history of this digital revolution, it's a pure story of power from the beginning and of politics from the beginning. The people, the crazy people who 50 years ago decided to invent personal computing and internet were thinking politically. At this time, we had very few computers in the world, and they were for the army to calculate trajectories of missiles, etc. And some people, very crazy, said we cannot let this power just for the army. We want to share this power for everyone. We want to empower the people. We want to give power to everyone. So we have to invent personal computing and this global open free network. That was completely visionary but crazy too, because they could not imagine video game, social network, everything. It was just a political theory, actually. And they did it. Actually, they did empower the people. They did launch a stream of innovation, of permissionless innovation that was very impressive. They did change the world, but while giving power to everyone, they also gave power to evildoer, to harmful projects. So now that's slightly a different situation, because we have this very important stream of innovation, of creativity. As you said, Paul, the young generation will continue to surprise us and to invent and to change the world. And we have to face two issues. Bad actors. So now cybercriminality is something very serious. It costs just the ransomware issue, which is just one part of cybersecurity issues, costs now billions of dollars every year, and it doubles every year. And we have also sometimes state behavior, because now the confrontation can be warfare. We confront each other in the cyberspace. And we have another issue, which is the enclosure, the capture of this stream of innovation by big monopolies. And I don't accuse monopolies. They just did launch great companies and they became monopolies. But maybe we cannot afford monopolies. So the issue now is how can we protect, promote the empowerment stream, how to continue to share power to everyone, and how to protect ourselves, and not just us, but also the democracy. Because in front of evil actors or in front of big monopolies, we, the free citizen of sovereign states and real democracies, we are not free anymore. If we as citizens, we want to protect privacy, or if we as citizens, we want to refuse racism or terrorist content, And if we vote that we don't want terrorist content, and if our government are not strong enough to pass bills that are concretely applied and to ban this kind of content, for example, we are not free citizens, and we are not democracies anymore. And here, and to answer to your question, independently, actually, in a dual-track process, India and Europe did discover something. They discover that the role of governments can be to protect the platform, the infrastructure, to build or to share or to finance or to design infrastructures where everyone will be able to innovate, to create, so infrastructure where everyone can innovate, infrastructures that are open and everyone can check and understand and see if something is wrong, and that are with a feedback loop with democracy, so that we can control a bit to orient in a smooth manner, like a soft power, the use of those infrastructures. So in Europe, for example, in France, we did create France Connect, or some pieces of infrastructures. And that's a very interesting vision of the role of public service, because we don't pass regulation, bills, or things like this. We give resources, and we do orient the innovation stream, but because we are sharing some resources and not other types of resources. That's a much better approach of regulation for the innovators. So we have small pieces of this in Europe, and what you did in India is completely impressive. I don't know if everyone understands the Indian stack, the ID, the payment system, the data sharing system, and I know that there are other projects now. In just 8 years, it should have been impossible to design the system, to convince the decision makers, to build the system, to deploy everywhere in 8 years. That's completely impressive. We are very proud to have this friendship with this project, or the people who did this project. And again, just to conclude, if we together, Europe and India, we could say to the world, we want this digital revolution to be built on public, open infrastructures. We don't want to be ruled by big tech monopolies, nor by states that pretend to be sovereign but impose their view. We don't want a world with hegemonic actors. We want a world of openness, of digital commons, of cooperation. I think that together, we are 2 billion people. We can win this thing, and we can change this story.
Thank you. That's a wonderful exposition. And I think all three of us have spoken of hard power in terms of competition, geopolitical competition, cybersecurity, in terms of information warfare, impact on national security, defense, etc. But there's the other element of hard power, which is, and I wanted to set the context for you, which is economic. And we've all seen economic hard power, not just in terms of numbers or aggregates of trade and investment, but by the impact or influence on infrastructure, and the modern infrastructure being the digital infrastructure. SWIFT is one example of that. So, and at the same time, there is a soft power element in this, because what you have done with India Stack and with the entire public digital goods and solution, wherever you go in the world, people now speak about it. It has changed the way they perceive India. It's generated a very positive impression of India, both in its social sense, economic sense, and its innovation sense. So here we see an example of both the hard power and soft power at play. So I'd like to turn to you, Sharad, as one of those who has been at the center and at the heart of this great transformation taking place in India in the public digital space. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about it, and how do you see this translating into power?
So, yesterday, many of us were at Ambassador Javed Afshav's house, and some of us reached early. So we went over to see the Eiffel Tower, right? and built in 1890. I think in 2 years it was built very, very quickly. And it was after thousands of years that there was a human effort to build something that was taller than the pyramids. And it was therefore an assertion of human confidence, of belief in what France could do at that point in time, right? Is that a fair way of looking at this? And so what I like to say is that this has happened to countries many times in the past. If you go back to 1974, Thailand's per capita income was more than that of Korea. Today, Korea is almost 6 times that of Thailand. So somewhere, I think it had become clear that this 91-92 revolution that had happened in India, which was the opening up of the economy, had allowed India to build service companies that were really scale, international scale and world class. Paul, you'll probably agree that Infosys and Wipro and TCS would fall in that category. And you should know, he knows all about them because both Wipro and Infosys CEOs are from Capgemini earlier. So, our hospitals are well run. Our mobile operators, Airtel, Jio and others are well run. Our airlines are not bad if you travel by Indigo and Vistara. So it was clear we were in a position to build world-class services companies. But what we were not doing is building world-class product companies. And what makes France special is that there is Airbus that is here. And you should know that Airbus and Boeing make more profits than all the airlines of the world put together, right? So I won't go into all the details, but that has been the case. There's a structure of the economy where money is made in a part of the value chain which is beyond services. So when we looked at this, the question that was obvious to us was that the innovation ecosystem that you need to create an Airbus is very different than the innovation ecosystem that you need to create an Indigo airline. And in fact, an Indigo airline, no matter how good it is, will never become an Airbus, and possibly even vice versa. So the question was, what is that ecosystem that is needed? And that ecosystem that has generally been there for the last 70, 80 years has been that you have public goods of some kind and private innovation on top of that. And many of us can see this with COVID vaccine. I don't know if Krishna is here, the person from Bharat Biotech. He's not here. He gave a wonderful talk in the morning. But if you see Pfizer, on mRNA, the research has been 20 years. 14 to 15 years of that research was completely publicly funded. And then private money came in, and that is how you have the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine today. This is actually the story of everything and anything. Now, sitting in India, it was very hard for us to make a case to solve public research. But what we could solve for as volunteers was to solve for public platforms, digital public platforms. And I had a chance to walk Paul to the India Stack chart here that many of you have seen. And I was trying to explain to him that everything that you know here in this room, which is eKYC, eSign, DigiLocker, UPI, now account aggregator, OCEN, and soon public credit registry, which will come next year, have actually been built for that street vendor. Her name is Rajni. And so the reason, and the only thing that I think we ended up doing right was to make 3 bets that I think have paid off. One is that it must unleash innovation. You can only unleash innovation if it's open. Open means many players can come in and compete with each other to do the right thing. Take eSign. If any of you use eSign, there is no government provider of eSign. eSign merely is a standard that allows many private players to come and compete with each other to offer the best eSign service, right? So that is openness became. Second, in India, the problem that you have to solve is India 2 and India 3, not India 1, right? And so it has to be inclusive. And the third, I think, which something Paul pointed out when we met last Friday for dinner in Bangalore, is that the market makes a big difference. It was market friendly. So that has been able to attract meaningful investments into companies. And tomorrow, for example, we'll have the largest player of UPI in the country, Samir Nigam, who will be giving a talk from PhonePe. And, and think of it, and you should ask him this question. He could not have believed 5 years ago that PhonePe will do more transactions every day than Alipay will do in China. If somebody mentioned to him, if anybody mentioned to any of us, including our friends in NPCI, they would have said this is not possible. So the reason it's become possible is because it's inclusive. It is catering to the part of India that has been underserved for a millennia. And it is open, which requires competition to come in and therefore unleash the best creative juices of people. Now, these problems that are very Indian in nature have obstacles that are global in nature. The obstacles come from multinational monopolies that are able to shape policy, that are able to influence the ecosystem, to prevent competitors from coming in with disruptive innovation to what they are doing. This is luckily or unluckily not an Indian problem at all. This is as much a French problem, a European problem, a Japanese problem, an Australian problem. It is not an Indian problem at all. So therefore, this gives us an opportunity for all of us to come together, to look at this system, because we are dealing with a common problem. And I'll come back, if there is time, Javed, to talk about that when we think digital, we are actually thinking internet, we are thinking the web. And a lot of those principles actually originated in Europe. So this is a coming home of that thinking in many ways. And I think I completely agree with Henri. It is time for India, France, and Europe to take charge and bring this original vision of mid-90s back to life. But if we'll come and talk about it if there is time.
Thank you. That was again, is this mic working? Yeah, that is. Again, thank you. We could just go on and about this. I think we've had a good discussion and analysis of what technology is as soft power or as hard power. We've also seen now that all of us agree that there's great opportunity for democracies, India and France and Europe, to work together. So I'll turn to, let us now spend the next few minutes talking about what exactly we can do together, both to advance our prosperity, our power, and our influence, and to shape the world in the ideals that we all believe in. So with that, let me ask Mr. Amilan.
Probably because I represent a public company but a private interest, I would nevertheless resist a little bit to what I heard. What drives technology is innovation. Of course, we have seen excess of monopolies, and I buy the idea of open. But an excess of regulation might as well hinder innovation. And I think that's where I don't feel totally comfortable with people that, in order to reduce the momentum of the most dynamic companies that are the US one, just speak of regulation. My view is the only way for Europe and India to exist is to be as dynamic in terms of R&D innovation than the Google, the Alibaba of the world. So, regulation will not make it. If we are only on regulation, we are just protecting our existence. And if it's only be defensive, you never win. You must be able to attack, which is why I absolutely buy the logic of, and I think even Americans should understand that free competition has been the engine of that civilization and that when there are monopolies that become too powerful, they hinder innovation. But I would just say so, I think. But when we try to regulate them, we have the President of the United States that try to protect US interests, which we might understand too. But competition is the mother of invention, and innovation is the mother of technology. So I don't want us to rush to regulation. We need some regulation, but as I knew what Henri would say and what you would say, I insisted on young people in innovation. We will never rebalance the power of the big tech, be they Americans or Chinese, if we do not innovate. So I take your public infrastructure as a way to allow startups to blossom on an open architecture. That I buy 300, 500, 1,000%. But I just say regulation will not make it. Just so I insist on that. Can I just say, I was a former civil servant, as some of you may know. I spent 15 years. In the ministries, we love edicting bills and regulation. Regulation will never drive innovation.
I think I'm glad you brought that point up, because I think there is a bit of a misconception on what both Sharad and Henri were talking about. I think neither was speaking about regulation at all. In fact, they were talking about resisting any efforts to create monopolies that also hinder innovation. And they were not talking about, and as a civil servant, I assure you, that I would like to see all regulations reduced. Our Prime Minister has done away with some 17,000 pieces of legislation, and nobody's noticed them, so you can imagine what that means. That means they didn't matter in the first place, they were only hindering things. I think they both, and this is a very good thing you did, because they hadn't actually sharply articulated this point, and it might have given the impression that they were for public intervention in innovation. I think what they were saying is to foster a climate of innovation where people can come and do the things and challenge existing players, drive them also to innovate further, and therefore create a virtuous cycle of innovation, openness, and more innovation. So thank you very much for sharpening that particular point. But let me go back, as you know, in the business of diplomacy, to see what do we do. So what is it that India and France and India and Europe can do in terms of the digital domain to, as I said, utilize what their values, build on their values, build on their capabilities, build on what they have already done to foster an environment which is open, innovative, inclusive, democratic, accessible to all as we would like it to be, fosters innovation, and in a sense also therefore advances the values that we also strongly believe in, including in the multilateral setting.
Thank you. Yes, I want to say, like Jawed said, we didn't mention regulation so far. But we didn't mention, we mentioned the fact that public service government can share some resources for innovators. And then, you're right, we didn't say that then everyone has to innovate like crazy, of course. Private sector, big companies, small companies, industries, and maybe state itself. And we didn't say it, but I'm very happy to say it now with you. But if we consider the very history of internet itself, the companies didn't finance the first internet. The first internet was paid by academics, by universities. This was a global infrastructure, and then company came and did innovate like crazy. So they had an infrastructure for innovation. And that's my answer to your question, Jawed. You know, there is a great diplomat, a great French diplomat, Talleyrand. Talleyrand was a great French diplomat at the beginning of the end of the 18th century, and he did invent the agile methodologies because he said, nothing in the world, nothing great was born great. Nor the river, nor the trees, nor the nation. So we have to start somewhere with a small but efficient starting point. And my vision is quite simple. you have this very impressive Indian stack. We in Europe, we did pass a lot of time to build interoperability between Europeans. So now, for example, we have a interoperability framework for our European IDs. So my first idea is that we should build interoperability between EU and India. We should ask, and I will actually, it should be possible for an Indian citizen to use a European public service with Aadhaar identity. And it should be possible for a European citizen to use a European ID and to use an Indian public service. If we make this, then, and I know that Jawed started, we have to encourage, and I say it publicly, the French and European startups to consider this very important market, because when you have the same ID, the same payment system, the same data sharing system for more than 1 billion people, that's a very impressive market for a tech company, because you can deploy your services very easily. That's a frictionless access to markets. And we should encourage Indian companies to consider the European market, because our vision of ID, payment are quite convergent. We didn't build now a completely simple interoperability, a one-click interoperability, but that's not so different. So we should say to each startup in India and in France, Europe, that actually they have a 2 billion people market. And then, as said Paul, they have to innovate like crazy.
Thank you, Sharon.
You know, the area, I think the biggest opportunity for us is to look at data sharing protocols. You know, data is you can say the fourth factor of production. And there cannot be anything that you're doing. You're building bounce scooters, you know, they'll have to be personalized. In manufacturing, you will need data. In healthcare, you need data to help, you know, diagnose what is happening. You want to give somebody a loan, you have to assess the risk that individual has, and that requires data. Data is a factor of production that is going to be very significant. And I think given what started in France with Canil, you know, a simple idea that you should have consented flows of personal data, French took or rather Europe with GDPR took a very regulatory heavy approach, as you pointed out. India has taken a very technology centric approach, and the balance is actually in a techno-legal approach that Henri and the rest of the team have been really looking at. And I think if we are at the threshold of being able to get that problem to get solved at scale, and that is called the data empowerment and protection architecture. And I think if India, France, and through France, Europe can come together to liberalize the flow of data, but in a way where the rails are well established and there is both protection and empowerment for the citizens, I think we will be able to reignite innovation in the economy in a way that we don't foresee today. So to me, that is an opportunity that is staring at us. And if we are here 3 years from now or 2 years from now, maybe that is the measure that we must have, that have we made enough progress in making that happen.
Any thoughts from you?
Just to add something, we might be too focused on infrastructure. The most active field for innovation is actually the consumer world, because consumer, and notably young consumer, are hungry for disruptive technology and new things. And I think, as you understand, I'm absolutely obsessed with innovation and looking forward, not looking backward. And but if you ask us what can we do to equip and get prepared for that software, I think where Europe is not doing bad on equipment goods, even very technological one. You refer to Airbus, you can think of some other where we are well placed. Where the Americans are really dominating, it's on consumer goods. And I think we should think of what we do for consumer. So I saw a little further the pavilion of LVMH. So France is very known for luxury goods. Now they have, and they start, if you watch and look across Vivatech, they start to think how technology can change consuming luxury goods. And go to their pavilion and you will see that. So what I await, and I will end with that, people that know me will smile, the challenge for India will be where do you excel? Obviously in movies, Bollywood, that's your piece of excellence. So I need to see the digital Bollywood emerging that will surpass and do better than Hollywood when they will go digital. And I think we speak of the metaverse. What I want to see are the Bollywood creation in the metaverse, because they may well be more absorbed and with a hungry appetite by the world than the Hollywood metaverse. And that's where we play. So let's play the offensive and not play defensive.
Oh, excellent point, and I thought I might just build on that and add for you that at the Cannes Film Festival, we had a number of Indian startups. By the way, majority were founded by women that were pitching for in the AR and VR and in the digital content creation. At this point in Ansi, there is a similar startup event that's taking place where we have a very big presence. And yes, we do fancy ourselves being the content hub in what is going to be the next stage of consumption of cinema or other production. So we are there. Anything you wanted to add? I think you wanted to add something.
You know, I agree with Paul that we have to focus. But Paul, you know, India is rich in problems. So ultimately, innovation is to solve problems. And we have something, let's say, on health. You know, we have to, as a country, deliver near universal health coverage at $230, which is 1/10 of what you spend. And, you know, you offer good health. Your French health system is a good health system. The question for us is, can we offer a similar health system at less than 1/10 the cost? So if we have to do that, we have to reinvent many of the paradigms that are there in health. Because if you have to have point of care diagnostics, you know, it has to be at a price point that does not exist today. If we have to equip doctors to be able to diagnose, we have to do it using technology at a scale that has never been done before. You know, if we have to, you know, do COVID vaccination, you know, we have to do it, you know, at a, you know, just forget the world. In India, we used to do 25 million vaccinations a year because we have 25 million children that are born a year. And then when COVID came, we were forced to do 25 million vaccinations a week using the same vaccination centers. You know, you went to the same vaccination centers. And there were 2 days when we did 25 million vaccinations a day. Now that thinking is what we need to bring at scale. So I agree with you. You know, the mother of invention or innovation is necessity. And I think in India, what these youngsters have taken on, and which is where I want to conclude with the Eiffel Tower example, they have taken on a sense that they can solve India's hard problems. Whether it's the government or digital public goods, they're merely enablers of their efforts to solve India's hard problems. And to the extent that they're going to be focused on India's hard problems in a confident, self-confident way, I think India will be a foundry of innovation of a kind that we have never seen before in many areas, health and many other areas as we go forward.
Quick word from you.
Well, with all due respect, because I do respect great entrepreneurs, but I slightly disagree with Paul. And I want to say that if you are an entrepreneur, if you create your company within Facebook, if you use just PayPal as a payment system, if you use just Google Maps as a geographical system, if you put your data just on Amazon Web Service, you will never become a unicorn because you don't control your value chain, you don't control your margins, they decide your margins. And if you want to create a unicorn, you need to build your company somewhere when you can decide something. I deeply believe this.
Thank you. And I think disagreement is also a source of innovation and invention. I'll just conclude by saying that while we've tended to focus on the digital world, there's a whole vast area that will benefit from innovation, where we are working together, India and France, which is clean energy, mobility, health, biodiversity, blue ocean sustainability, ocean resources, and of course now increasingly in food security and education areas as well. So all the challenges of the future require us to work more closely in innovation, and that will be a source both of prosperity and power, whether hard or soft, in the new world. So thank you all for such an illuminating discussion. Thank you for being here with us. And on that note, we conclude.
Just this one is working.